Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
L. Francis Rooney III is the fourth generation of his family to own Manhattan Construction Company. Manhattan was founded by Laurence H. Rooney in Chandler in Oklahoma Territory in 1896. As the first company to incorporate in Oklahoma in 1907, Manhattan played an important role in building the Southwest. Manhattan Construction, with its headquarters in Tulsa, Oklahoma, has built Cowboy Stadium in Texas, the U.S. Capitol Visitors Center at the United States Capitol, the Oklahoma State Capitol, the George Bush Presidential Library, and the George W. Bush Presidential Library. Manhattan is the only construction company to work on two presidential libraries. Francis Rooney is a former United States ambassador to the Holy See, having served from 2005 to 2008. Listen to Francis Rooney talk about Manhattan Construction Company and his service as a United States ambassador on voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling, and today's date is May 18, 2015. Francis, would you state your full name, please?
My full name is Laurence Francis Rooney III, but I go by Francis Rooney.
And your date of birth?
December 4, 1953.
Your present age would be?
63.
Tell us where we're recording this interview.
At our corporate headquarters of Manhattan Construction Company here in Tulsa.
Where were you born?
I was born in St. John's Hospital in Tulsa, but my family lived in Muskogee.
And the reason for that?
Oh, my father didn't think the doctors in Muskogee were as good as the doctors up here.
Okay. Your mother's name?
My mother's name was Lucy Turner Rooney.
Tell us a bit about her, where she was from, where she grew up.
Mom grew up in Pensacola, Florida, from a family of two brothers and her. And her father, my grandfather, was from Pensacola, Florida, and had 11 brothers and sisters, all of whom were from Pensacola, Florida. His father was from Pensacola, Florida. They go way back there.
What was her personality like?
Mom was a real Southern belle. She was a real party organizer and a very warm person, had a lot of friends, did a lot of community activities here with the opera and things like that.
You learned some of those traits from her?
I think so. Mom was very outgoing and loved people. Had a lot of friends and never met a stranger, real Southern kind of person. And I think I got a lot from my mother, yeah.
Brothers and sisters that you would have?
I have two sisters and three brothers.
In the birth order, where are you?
I'm the oldest.
Your father's name?
My father was also named Laurence Francis Rooney. He went by Larry.
So he'd be the second?
He would be.
Laurence Francis Rooney II. Tell us about where he came from, where he grew up.
He grew up in Muskogee because my grandfather had moved over to Muskogee with his father after the company got going in the early 1900s.
Describe his personality.
He was a warm person and very clear speaking and very clear thinking. And he was a stern dad, stern father. Of course, back then I think fathers were generally more stern than maybe this generation of fathers. I'm not sure.
Did he push you a lot? Did he expect high standards?
Both my parents expected high standards of us. I mean, it was routine torture to go over the quarterly grades when they came home and have a fairly thorough analysis of performance and how it could be improved. And they had high expectations for all six of us.
So that was good.
Oh, yeah, it was good. And I think it worked out well. We all did well in school, and everybody did well in college, and is gainfully employed and things like that.
Your education, you began in elementary in Muskogee?
I did at Sacred Heart Grade School, same one that Jim Jones attended.
The former Congressman Jim Jones.
It's an interesting story. His father, Pat, headed up the VFW post in Muskogee and used to come and give out our awards to us every year at the end of the year at Sacred Heart.
And you've been in touch and you share camaraderie with him about
He's
that.
a wonderful public servant, was a great ambassador to Mexico, led the stock exchange. He's one Oklahoman that's had one of the most important careers of any Oklahoman I've ever met.
And we have interviewed him for this website, so you can listen to his story on voicesofoklahoma.com. So then you're in junior high and high school.
Junior high in Muskogee. In high school, I went away to a Jesuit high school in Maryland called Georgetown Prep. All six of us kids went away to high school.
To that same high school?
No. Two brothers went to prep. One went to Shattuck in Minnesota, which is where my father and uncle had gone. And the two girls went to St. Mary's Hall in San Antonio.
The Georgetown Prep School, was that a good experience for you?
Oh, yeah. It was great. It was great to get out of Oklahoma and see the world a little bit. The schools in Muskogee were not very good. and were deteriorating. There were things going on at that time involving where people went to school, busing, et cetera. A lot of turmoil with the public schools at that time. So that's when my parents sent us away.
So they were preparing you for anything in life at that prep school? A general education?
Yeah. One of my brothers got an engineering degree, but the rest of us all had a liberal arts. And I think my parents emphasized reading and liberal arts a lot when we were kids. They were avid readers, read a lot of history. They traveled a lot. And so the liberal arts as a foundation for a balanced education was a big part of our family, I think.
How much social activities did you have at Georgetown Prep School?
Well, a fair bit. I mean, it was just like going to school anywhere else. It's just that I was a boarder instead of living in our house. About half the school was boarders and half the school were people that lived in the Virginia, Maryland, Washington area. So it was a fantastic experience because I had friends all over the town. We're always going to their house for events, spend the night, et cetera, and got to know the area well. I mean, I know Virginia, Maryland, and Washington as well as I know Tulsa.
Did you get involved in school newspaper?
I did. I was involved in the school newspaper, and I was involved in wrestling and a little bit in football.
Then you're on to your further education, which happens where?
Georgetown University.
And that would be in
1971.
And you would graduate then in 75.
I applied early, got in, came home for Thanksgiving, and told my parents I was going to Georgetown. They had never even asked one word about college, where I was going to apply, or anything.
Was that kind of strange?
Yeah, I thought so. But I didn't need a lot of hand-holding, but I mean, yeah.
Well, they knew you were on a right track.
Yeah, but most people dig into helping their kids apply and figure out where they want to go. It just never came up.
Was that a natural, though, to go from Georgetown Prep to Georgetown University? Most kids.
Well, I guess I'm just resistant to change, and I'm a creature of comfort and habit. I knew the area, and really I love Washington, and I had spent a lot of time on the campus of Georgetown, and so felt very familiar there. In fact, I was on the campus of Georgetown one day when there were 2 tanks on the campus of Georgetown and tear gas everywhere. It was at the time of the May Day demonstrations. I think it was 1969, the anti-war demonstrations.
You were quite young at that time, but
a sophomore or junior, yeah.
So that had to leave quite an impression.
Very interesting. Very interesting. The whole first floor of the Healy building, which was kind of the main building at Georgetown, was full of hippies camping out, sleeping on blankets. The National Guard was chasing people around, and a lot of tear gas. This was the time when the nuns put chicken blood on the front door of Dow Chemicals Washington office and all those kind of anti-war things.
And the war was Vietnam.
Yes.
What were your feelings about all that then? Did you want to join them, or were you looking
No,
down?
I was pretty conservative about that, and I read a fair bit about it. For a young person, obviously you don't know that much when you're that age, but felt that really the hegemonic pursuit by the communist bloc was something that we had to face. Now, maybe Vietnam, in hindsight, wasn't the best case for it, and maybe we didn't prosecute the war as well as we should have, but it did start the containment of communism, and that was an important thing.
So then, as a young man, seeing that, you didn't get involved in any of the demonstrations or anything,
No.
You just...
Kind of young Republicans group.
That's...
Yeah, that one. Even despite the fact we had the Nixon turmoil during college there.
You were a member then of the Young Republicans group?
At Georgetown, sure.
What did that do for you? How did that help you?
Well, Georgetown was pretty conservative back then. They had a pretty strong political Young Republicans club. And, of course, being in Washington, the school is very politically oriented. There's speakers coming all the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many politicians and world leaders we heard at Gaston Hall, which was a unique attribute of the school being located in Washington, D.C., as well as being able to access things like protests or Supreme Court cases or going to Congress, all the different kind of unique things you can do when you're in Washington, D.C. We took advantage of that in high school and college.
Bill Clinton wasn't around Georgetown at that time, was he?
He was about 10 years before, about the time of Frank Keating and Tony Laulinger.
It was Keating. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Tony Laulinger, Frank Keating were all there
Yes.
about 10 years before.
Yeah, and he's talked about that. So then your law degree comes from?
Georgetown University. I'm really a creature of habit. I'm a very change-resistant individual, I guess.
But you enjoyed it there.
Loved it.
Obviously.
Loved it. I didn't really like practicing law that much, but I really enjoyed law school. Enjoyed constitutional law. Had some great teachers. Being, again, in Washington, you had access to people like Bob Potofsky, who the famous antitrust lawyer who headed up the FTC. I had access to a guy named Ruff, who was at the time one of the leading prosecutors in the country. Sam Dash taught criminal law when he wasn't prosecuting Watergate people. I mean, it was a pretty fascinating time to be around Washington during those years.
Anybody else that you can think of, names that really impressed you? Sometimes we hear speeches and comments from people that stay with us forever. Any of those moments that happened there at Georgetown?
I don't know that I would say any particular verbiage, but I definitely remember Hubert Humphrey coming to speak at Gaston Hall. I remember Ted Kennedy coming to speak. Bill Buckley, I introduced Bill Buckley one time when he came to speak at a student gathering.
What was he like? Because you had to see him be
Oh, he was a great guy.
Personal.
Bill Buckley, he was a great guy. He was a sailor. I got to know him pretty well. We had him come to Tulsa one time to speak to our local YPO chapter. The kids and I picked him up at the airport, but we had a lot in common because he loved the sea, loved to sail, loved boats.
I'm from Minnesota, North Dakota, so Hubert Humphrey was really big up there when I lived up there. Did you see him close? And
I did.
There was something charismatic about him, wasn't there?
There was. Something interesting was my junior and senior year of college, I got to work for Henry Bellman as an intern. And Bellman was very close to Hubert Humphrey, personally. He just thought he was a good guy. So I got to know a lot of the senators that were Bellman's best friends, as well as the ones that were Dewey Bartlett's best friends, because Bartlett was a close family friend. So I got access to a lot of people there. Enjoyed the work quite a bit, too.
Isn't that something in this day and age, that if we don't agree politically, somehow we can't become friends either? But here's Henry Bellman enjoying the company of a Hubert Humphrey. And
This was a time of much less partisanship. I mean, it's always partisan, okay, because you have differences of opinion about which way the country should go. And people that usually run for these offices and take that beating feel very strong about their opinions. That's what, I guess, sustains them to do that. But there was a personal chemistry that was different. People, first of all, most of them live there instead of commuting back and forth as much as they do. So they had times to build personal relationships. I know David Boren had a lot of really good Republican friends. Certainly a lot of Republicans did and still do think the world of David Boren. Same with Sam Nunn, who was a very close friend of David's. Got to know him a little bit through David Boren. You know, Bellman's best friends were Pete Domenici and Hubert Humphrey.
Not to pursue this too much, but Hubert Humphrey is so outgoing, and Bellman is kind of to himself, and that these two guys would be friends. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I'll tell you a story. One time when I was there, Bellman said, "I want you to come down to the office Saturday morning." And I thought, oh, boy, I really screwed something up. He's going to run me off, and Dad's going to be all upset. He'd been given a desk by the OSU shop people. And he said, well, you're a carpenter, right? Can you help me put this thing together? So he'd gotten some tools, and I came down Saturday morning and put the desk together for him.
And that is an interesting question about you in this construction business. Were you good with your hands?
Yeah. And one thing I did, I went through the union apprenticeship program starting when I was 16. That's the soonest you could do it back then. Now I think you have to be 18 because of OSHA. Went all through the 4-year apprenticeship program where they teach you how to build stairs and rafters and use a framing square and how to be safe with skill saws and drills. You know, I worked for the company all those summers, building forms and pouring concrete, using a level to lay out, to get things in the right place.
So then there were those that when you became an executive position, they also knew that he can do some of these things himself. Yeah,
and Dad was a big believer in hard labor. All the boys, we all worked construction. One of my brothers also worked on the ranch, hauling hay too, which I never had to do that, fortunately, but we all worked a lot of construction. I worked a couple of years in Houston. One of my brothers worked in Houston 1 year with me. I worked in Oklahoma City one summer on Presbyterian Hospital. If you ever find yourself in the morgue at Presbyterian Hospital and lean on a wall, that's a concrete wall that I built.
All right. Back to being an intern for Henry Bellman. Were you intern for anybody else? Did you do any other Washington?
Just Henry Bellman.
For a couple of...
2 years.
2 years.
And then I had the first year of law school, which, as you probably have heard, is pretty intense, first year. But then the second year, where it's not so intense, I went back to work on the Hill. I went to work for Senator Hugh Scott, who had been the Senate Minority Leader from Pennsylvania. Really nice guy. And he left the Senate, and I went with him and went to a new office of a Philadelphia law firm, the new Washington office. And it was very interesting. It was Senator Scott. It was a guy named Hendershot that had been the county attorney or city prosecutor in Philadelphia, and the brother of Alex Haley that had just written Roots. That was pretty famous back then. His brother, I think his brother's name was Charles. Anyway, he was the third lawyer in the office. So these three lawyers, all very interesting people, and me.
So how did that work out?
Oh, it was great. It was fun. And Senator Scott, they used to have these partners meetings up in Philadelphia every couple of months, and I'd go up with him on the train to meet some of the folks in Philadelphia, and it was very interesting.
You're around all these political people. Did you think that one day you would want to be a politico yourself?
No. I always thought that I would be interested in the issues and in policy and in trying to impact things, but not necessarily to run myself. I just never really thought it would be interesting to spend that much time trying to raise money. The more I've been around it, the less I like the idea of personally running. I'm kind of private, really. But I've always, ever since college, wanted to be involved in the policy side of things, especially foreign policy and where the country's going and why we do the things we do. Helping good candidates is one way to exercise public service without actually running yourself.
I am sure you've been asked many times to run for office. And that was an easy no, was
It's
it?
an easy no. I've been asked a time or two by people that really don't understand my strengths and weaknesses. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it.
So what is your weakness?
I just really would probably never have the discipline to stay out on the campaign trail as hard as these people have to do. It's nice to have personal time. It's nice to read a book. I'm reading The Next Decade by George Friedman right now. He wrote The Next 100 Years a couple of years ago. I'm usually always reading one book in Spanish, either Carlos Fuentes or Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Vargas Llosa, or somebody like that. I would never have the discipline to just go 100% onto the campaign trail.
All right, then about reading, and you're so busy. When do you find time for reading?
Well, I read 3 hours yesterday.
Do you read 3 hours during the day, or when do you do it?
Last evening, before dinner and after dinner.
So it's an evening activity
Instead
or
of watching
something.
TV, I'll read. I read on airplanes.
A lot of people say they don't have time, but I guess you can cut out TV to do that, can't you?
Airplanes are a great place to read.
Somewhere along the line, you must have met a young lady by the name of Kathleen.
Oh, yes. At Georgetown.
Which Georgetown?
Well, she was undergraduate in the Foreign Service School, and I was in the law school.
And so was it love at first sight? How did that work out?
Yes. Kathleen was living with a series of girls. What a lot of people do at Georgetown is you'll rent these townhouses that have 4 or 5 bedrooms, and you'll get 5 or 6 kids living in one. Kathleen was living with 3 or 4 of her friends on 33rd Street, and I was living with 3 or 4 of my friends on N Street, which is right around the corner. So one of my roommates was dating one of hers, and that's where we met. Then I chased her until she'd marry me.
And she still hasn't said yes, right?
Well, she did get monogrammed towels after we'd been married about 7 years. I kind of felt like getting vested in the profit-sharing plan.
And
we have our 37th anniversary this August.
where is Kathleen from originally?
Chicago.
Children from your marriage.
We have 3. Our oldest son, Larry, is here. We have 2 grandbabies, and he works for the company in the Tulsa office. Second son, Michael, is an attorney, went to Notre Dame Law, spent 5+ years with Jones Day, an international law firm in Washington doing international law, and he, about a year ago, came to work for us as our general counsel. He's based in Washington. And then our daughter, Kathleen, who went to business school at Georgetown after college and worked for Jim Inhofe for a while, and Mel Martinez before that, is now working in our real estate development business in the Washington, Virginia, Maryland area.
After you graduate from law school, what happens to you?
I went to Houston to practice with a small firm that did a lot of financial and international transaction law. And Kathleen went to work on George H.W. Bush's campaign in '78. The campaign that went through the Iowa primary, which he won, but then he got trounced in New Hampshire, and the rest is history with Reagan. So I'd been practicing, I guess, maybe a year and a half or so, maybe, when my dad got cancer, and they gave him 5 weeks to live. So about the time that Mr. Bush dropped out of the campaign, we moved back to Tulsa in February of 1980 and went to work for the construction business there out on the city service project. I don't know what it is now. It's kind of an office park. Different offices are in there, across from Quick Trip. Remember the old city service technology center?
Right. You served as CEO of Rooney Holdings, an investment and holding company?
Yes. After Dad died in October of 1980, we divided up our family stuff. Uncle John's family and Dad's family, where they were 50-50 partners in most everything. One of the things that we took was the construction company. And my brother Tim and I bought the family out of the construction company. It was a really difficult time, if you remember, 1984, after the Penn Square Bank failed in 1982, et cetera, and the company had a lot of trouble, or pretty much broke. It was a really bad thing for my mother to be in, had bonding requirements where you have to guarantee financially, and I didn't want her doing that. My little sister was still only like 11 when my dad died. So Timothy and I bought it out and reorganized it. We set up a holding company to own it. Then we have the flexibility to have some of the company guys be shareholders of it. So Timothy and I would have the holding company to own the rest of it.
So is it true then today you are the majority owner of Manhattan Construction Company?
I am. My brother Tim was my minority partner. He wanted to get out in, I think it was 2002 or 3. I ran the company from when we bought everybody out in 84 until about 1996 or 7. And Tim ran it from then till we bought him out in 2003, I believe it was.
You're the 4th generation of your family then to own the company.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say the kids are the 5th now, because really they own most of it. You get right down to it.
Let's go back to the beginning. Tell the story of Manhattan. First of all, the name Manhattan.
That's a subject of a lot of different stories, and I'm not 100% sure which one would be accurate. What's in the manuscript that Bob Blackburn has researched is that there was a Manhattan Construction Company of New York established by a man named Luman, who was from Atlanta in the Northeast. And he came out to Oklahoma seeking construction work and met my grandfather in Chandler, and they became partners. That's how the company got going in Oklahoma in 1896. And then in 1907, along about that time, I think Lumen died and Granddad bought him out, and they incorporated the company in Oklahoma in December 1907, 1 month after it became a state. It's the first corporate charter issued by the state of Oklahoma.
So then Laurence H. Rooney, your great-grandfather, begins the company in 1896.
Yes. He had a partner, Mr. Lumen, at the time for a few years.
That was then Oklahoma Territory, and the charter was out of New York.
Right.
He had another business, though, other than construction.
He did. He was in a few things in Chandler. He was kind of an entrepreneur. He was in the concrete business, and I think he had a dry goods store or something like that. I know he got involved with the local bank in Chandler and got to be friends with the Hightowers, who ended up founding the First National Bank of Oklahoma City. Granddad was on that board for years and used to have a fairly sizable stock position in.
I think it was about a year before the first ever commercial oil well was drilled in Oklahoma, 3 years before the Oklahoma Land Run, that he had started the Manhattan Construction Company. So then the state becomes the 46th state in 1907, and Manhattan then is the first corporate entity in the state of Oklahoma.
That's right. We have a copy of the certificate around here somewhere. We have the original in a safe deposit box.
I don't know what the first building built by Manhattan Construction was, if it goes before that, but they were the low bidder in the original Oklahoma State Capitol building in Guthrie.
Mm-hmm. We built the second one as well. And now we're going to renovate it.
So there's an interesting story. Somebody listening to this, what, you built a Capitol building in Guthrie? And we know the story there, that actually there was a vote taken amongst the populace of Oklahoma, and they voted 96,000 votes to move the capital to Oklahoma City. Guthrie came in second with 31,000 and Shawnee with 8,000. So then Governor Haskell says, all right, this is the way it shall be. However, they say that in the dark of night, they actually came and stole the state seal from Guthrie and took it to Oklahoma City. And so now your company builds the second.
And I've heard that from some of Bob's research that it was kind of a partisan deal, that there was a bit of a Republican-Democrat issue in whether it be Guthrie or Oklahoma City. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Well, it was wrested away from Guthrie.
You bet.
Probably folks there are still upset about that. You built the Oklahoma State Capitol building, and we should say also they didn't finish the dome then, but you finished the dome later on under the administration of Governor Frank Keating. In
a joint venture with Flint Co., which was a great state project. Frank courageously fought to get that done, and I think his judgment's been vindicated many times over. Oklahomans are proud to have that dome on there.
Manhattan constructs the Love County Courthouse. We did 30 county courthouse projects across Oklahoma.
Yeah, about half the ones in the state we built.
Then they finished the construction on the relocation capital in Oklahoma City, 1917. Then you build in Texas, your first Texas project there, the Denison Hotel.
Yeah, they did. They did a few projects in North Texas and a few courthouses and things before they actually, later in the 50s, got started full-time in Houston.
Did they not have any competition at all?
Oh, sure.
Because they landed major projects in our state.
They did.
Can you talk about that?
There's always plenty of competition in most any business, and especially construction. I think that Granddad must have been a real good operator. His partner in Houston, Deke Bullen, was a very good operator, and I think Granddad had some good people, a good organization. But there were many companies around. You know, I used to have the W.R. Grimshaw Company in Tulsa. You had Flint Co., Tulsa Rig and Reel, it was called then. They started out more on the oil field side, moved into building. The Bass family from Enid is an old construction company. Mr. Bass Sr. was a real good friend of my grandparents. So there's plenty of competition around. And in Dallas, of course, the Henry C. Beck Company was an old one that we used to compete with for years.
But you're always landing them.
Well, no, we got our share, put it that way.
You've had your losses, too. I mean, you've lost out.
When we get a bad job, it's a bad job. We've had some real bad jobs.
Manhattan builds its first project for American Airlines in 1943. 55, Laurence F. Rooney called one of the most colorful industrial leaders in Oklahoma.
I believe he might have been colorful, yeah. All these old-time oil guys, construction guys lived hard and rode hard and were put up wet, you know.
Do you see yourself in them at all? Are you a different kind of person?
No, I think I'm more process-centric person.
Laurence F. Rooney retires in 56, remains company's board of directors. Then you have, I guess, those who were not members of the family. Ray Bassor?
Bassor, yeah, for a few years.
Ray Bassor retires.
Dad, yeah.
That's when your dad then takes over in 1960. And what do you remember about that? I mean, there are some icons in Texas: Fiesta Texas Theme Park, Texas Rangers Ballpark, Cowboy Stadium.
Yeah, we've been very fortunate to have had good clients and good people. If you have good people and do a good job, you'll get good clients. And if you have good clients, it gives you an opportunity to really build a great company, and I feel real fortunate, both for the people that have put their career with Manhattan and the customers that have put their trust in Manhattan.
Now, during these years, are you thinking, I'm eventually going to come back to the company?
Not really.
In the construction company?
No, I loved working construction, but I was pretty interested in both practicing law for a while in Houston and really pretty interested in staying in Houston. I really liked Houston and Texas. Obviously, we did come back on a moment's notice when Dad got cancer, but Kathleen and I expected to stay in Houston.
Did your father talk to you about, we'd sure like you to become part of the company? Was there any of that kind of discussion going on? They never did any of that?
Never came out.
So
we talked about the company at times.
But never bringing you in or asking you if you will, I'm going to retire and all this kind of thing?
No, that might have evolved had he lived longer. I mean, he died when he was 55.
Was that sudden?
Well, they said it was going to be. They gave him 5 weeks when they found it, but he ended up living from February to October.
He was one of these robust sort of guys?
He was. He was a great hunter, loved to quail hunt. When I'd come home from high school, having been playing football and wrestling and stuff like that, and running cross country and whatnot, he'd make a point of taking me quail hunting and walk me to death just to make sure I knew who was boss. I mean, he could walk 8-9 hours straight, only taking time for a sandwich. This was back at a time when all down around Muskogee and Stigler County and all that, we had a lot of quail.
How was he built? Was he your size, bigger?
No, he was about my size.
But he could walk?
He could walk. He loved to hunt. Yeah, he was a good shot, too. Many times I saw him kill 2 quail with 1 shot.
Wow.
I could barely hit one with tons of shots.
But you kept up with him.
Oh, yeah. No, I loved it. It was a great thing to do with my dad, yeah. We hunted a lot. Ducks, geese, quail.
And the dogs that are involved in those kind of things?
Dogs are fun, yeah. He had a whole cadre of duck dogs and quail hunting dogs and the whole bit. Mm-hmm.
Great bonding experience, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. You're out there all day.
So then when he dies, obviously, what are we going to do next for the company?
Yeah, that was a very difficult time. It was 1980. The boom was still on, as you may recall around here, and it stopped abruptly in 1982. I mean, they always say the milestone's Penn Square Bank right around the 4th of July, 1982. And it was bad. It was bad. All of our customers were broke. The company was rolling along. It's hard to slow something down that's rolling along that hard. The subcontractors were all going broke. We had a very difficult time. The guys that were running the company made some bad decisions, too. It was so bad, like in 1985 or so, the only 2 significant projects in the city of Tulsa were those 2 shopping centers at 61st and Memorial. Fortunately, we had them both. Eaton Square and then the one on the south side. They don't look like anything particular right now, but in 1985, there wasn't anything else going on with them.
Those are the only projects?
Those were the only significant projects going on in town. It was so slow. Yeah. And so what happened for the companies that were in Oklahoma and Texas that were affected by the oil bust, you had to make a decision as to whether you go find some other places to work or you shrink. And a lot of people, including the blockheads running this company, decided they were going to go find some new places to work instead of shrink. A lot of companies did that. Many of them went broke. We came pretty close. We got down to where we had less than $800,000 working capital. They took a disastrous job up in Wichita. We never worked up in Wichita. It's cold up there. We got to do things to work through the winter up there you don't have to do down here. They didn't know that. They took a job in Washington, D.C. on one of the most horrific sites around Tyson's Corner, the ones that the locals all put more money in the bid for because they knew the site had terrible drainage and access problems. Of course, our guys right off the turnip truck, yeah, we can go do that. Well, we lost a few $1 million there, too. So the long and short of it, we got down to less than $800,000 in working capital. Timothy and I were just buying the company. I mean, I guess it worked well in the sense that we got it for a very good price in hindsight. But at the time, there wasn't much of a company to buy. So I immediately laid off half the company.
You bought that because it was an emotional buy, a family buy. You wouldn't have bought it otherwise.
No, I thought that we had a great name. It takes years to build that up. We had some really good people. We didn't have any money. The same good people that were making a lot of money in 78 through 82 were losing a lot of money in 82 through 84, but it wasn't any of their fault. It was the management that was too aggressive and was going in and taking risks in areas they didn't understand what they were doing. So I didn't think it'd be that big a deal to shrink the company up and regroup among a cadre of younger guys. Back then we were all in our early 30s, me and the guys that stayed, laid off half the company. And we decided we were going to ride it out. We were going to ride it out where we worked, Oklahoma and Texas. Now, we did stay in D.C. and kept doing 1 or 2 projects at a time, having paid a few $1 million for the entry ticket. and losses.
It was an interesting time here because you had Cal Burns, who assumed the presidency. He passes away in 1982 and was then succeeded by Don Jones, who died in 1984.
Yeah.
So leadership literally dies off. This is coming down to 84, a very pivotal year. That's then where you become the CEO.
I became CEO when we bought it. Don was still president, but he died a couple of years later. It might have been 83 when I became president, when we were in the process of buying it. We didn't get it closed until 84. We have these pictures of the ancestors on the walls of some of the different offices like down here. And someone asked me one time, why don't you put a picture up? I said, you got to be dead to get your picture up here.
And so you did assume the presidency then of Manhattan at a very critical time.
Yeah, it was critical. We had less than $800,000 of working capital, laid off half the company, laid off the older and expensive guys and kept the young guys, and we just regrouped and decided we were going to ride it out.
And then you expanded your operations in Oklahoma City, didn't you?
We did. We were fortunate to get some work for Baptist Hospital that gave us a chance to go to Oklahoma City and reopen the office there. We were also fortunate to get some work in Dallas a couple of years later. The first job we did when we went back into Dallas, we'd been in there early in the 70s building a large part of DFW Airport and the Dallas Convention Center. And I got a chance to go back to Dallas for Gerald D. Hines, building a job that actually was Chili's, Norman Brinker's headquarters. And, of course, we had the office in Houston. Our first big break came when Williams Companies here built River Center Mall in San Antonio. They gave us our first big break, Williams Realty. We also built the 2 black buildings down where Sampson Resources is for them.
In downtown Tulsa.
Right. Those were the jobs that let us get back on the map, both with customers and in the industry and financially as well.
And then you were on your way. In 1993, you were given the National Excellence in Construction Award. And there was a point, I'm sure you know, that'll never happen to us.
No, I never would have thought any of this would have happened. We just wanted to keep from going broke.
When you assumed the presidency, of course, you knew the company already.
Oh, yeah. I knew the people. I knew the business. And I'd done pretty much every job you could do.
So it wasn't like you were a new person walking in. Right. And then you began to, as you said, cut employees and all. Well, things turned around. The economic conditions of the country also helped you at that time?
Well, Oklahoma and Texas worked through the oil bust. Like everything seems to get worked through by some time or another. Things started to gradually get a little better. St. Francis started to expand a little bit. St. John's, we got back into St. John's. Baptist was expanding. The airport started to have a little things coming. So gradually the economy got better in Oklahoma, and certainly in Houston it did. It bounced back real fast in Texas, Dallas and Houston.
Everybody sees his name, Manhattan Construction, and they don't know, unless they listen to this, there was a time you only had $800,000 in working capital, wondering, are we going to survive?
That's right.
Do you ever take any of these things to sleep at night? Do they keep you awake at night?
No.
You shut them off?
I never had any problem with that, any problem with stress or anything like that. We just had to do what we had to do, and hopefully, again, if you have good people and you're in a good place, Oklahoma is a great place to be because people are honest and work hard and always willing to give you a chance. You can make things work out if you don't just outrun your skis and take too much risk. Construction management sometimes become enamored with growth. What we always used to say around here is you can't eat volume. You can only eat profits. And sometimes when people don't own the company, it's a lot easier for them to want to build a monument and have a big $1 billion sales or something. When you own the company, it's like, we better just make a little profit here.
Other executives here, do you have to remind other people of that?
Sometimes.
Maybe for some time.
Sometimes.
Right?
So we've had a few other bad patches where we've had a few bad jobs. We actually had some bad jobs while I was in Rome. That kind of got a little out of parameter, and we had to change some people out. It's really interesting, okay? Because I came in 84 with Don and the young guys, and we regrouped and built a new management team. Then I found that when I came back from Rome, around 2010, 11, digging into what had been going on, that many of the management team that had been in their 30s was now in their 60s, and some of them hadn't aged so well. Some of them, it had become more about them than the company, and it was time to make a few changes again, which we did. And we're about right now at the end of regrouping and rebuilding the second management team for the company to take it to the next level. And we've got our son here. We've got the other 2 kids in the business in D.C. We've got a new president of the building business, John Rahan, who actually lives in Atlanta, became from a competitor. We've replaced a few managers. We've had some people be promoted from within, which is great. So we have a whole new management team.
Then are they in their 40s, 50s?
Some of them are in their 50s. Some of them are in their 40s, and there's a few in their 30s.
After employees get to work so long, they begin to take ownership, and there's an ego, or there's something here that...
You've probably seen it too, John. People age differently. physically and mentally.
Right.
You know, I mean, you look at my idol, Walt Helmrich. The guy was so sharp and careful physically about what he ate, didn't drink. He read all the time, was so focused on current events. He was not going to let history run him down. He's kind of a model of people aging well. But not all people do. So we had some people here who really were thinking about retiring. Maybe they couldn't verbalize it, but I think they were maybe not looking to the future and as open to new ideas. You know, markets are always changing. Customers' interests or priorities are always changing. And so it's time for just a little bit of a spiritual tune-up around here.
Some major construction jobs in 2000, Reliance Stadium, $400 million project in Houston, constructing the first ever retractable roof in the NFL. What a challenge that had to be.
That was very interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
3-acre size, made it the largest in the United States.
Yeah, until Jerry Jones. His is 1/3 bigger, a full 1/3 bigger. It's a big one.
So when they're tackling that kind of project, your architects, your engineers and so forth, they're working on it, and you're right in there with them? Are you talking to them about it?
All the time. Yeah.
Understand?
A construction project is the ultimate team sport. It takes a lot of people to build a project. It takes designers, engineers, consultants about water and mechanical and air conditioning and electrical. It takes interior designers. It takes construction people to estimate what it's going to cost, to figure out the optimum scheduling to make the parts go together as efficiently as possible, the best combination of time and money and quality. And then it takes the workers, both at Manhattan and the subcontractors, to execute the work. And they have to be trained, organized, compensated, etc.
So as a president would have his cabinet meeting, you go right down the line. Obviously, these are people you can trust. You can't be expected to know everything they know about that. That's their profession, but you can talk to them and trust. Okay, you said it, I count on it.
You got to have a lot of good people to do big construction. When you don't, and someone takes an out-of-parameter risk or an unthought-out risk, everybody in the company suffers. Because usually, at least our experience is, when we have a bad job, it's a bad job. It's a few $1 million loss. It's just not an ankle biter. But we always complete the work and take care of the customer, regardless of what we may have screwed up in getting there.
Maybe some construction companies don't complete, or they're into it so deep they can't,
or they'll fight for extra money and blame other people and those kinds of things.
So you say, no, this is what we agreed to, and the customer's going to get that.
Yeah.
And so the name of Manhattan has always been strong ever since the first beginning. It never went through any controversy. So even though it was in tough times, Manhattan still stood strong, that name.
Right. We've only had one project that involved controversy. And that was the Oklahoma County Jail in the early 90s, I believe, early 90s. And what happened there was Oklahoma, like all states, had kind of a crony program of licensing architects and awarding public work to architects and things. You know, you had the David Hall scandals that David Boren uncovered. Well, Oklahoma County was not immune to that. And they had a guy that was actually a crooked county commissioner named Barnes, who actually, I believe, went to jail. We bid the job and got it. The architects that were designing it had never done in jail. They'd gotten the project because of crony capitalism, so to speak. So the job was defective in many respects. I had to know that because I had to lead the company's response to this. It's a really serious problem. It didn't have nearly as strong of embeds. It should have had to hold detention fixtures on. It didn't have nearly as strong of the things that go back in the wall to hold a window in. It was just a defective job that needed a lot of remediation. And of course, all fingers are pointed all different ways in those circumstances, and my job was to defend the company, which I did. Ultimately, we were proven absolutely right about everything. The architects were a real problem. County officials were a bit of a problem, and it was unfortunate.
Yeah, but it didn't really sully the name of Manhattan.
No, because we were vindicated on all fronts.
Right.
All we did was build a building. We actually tried to point some stuff out that we saw there was a problem, and no one wanted to deal with it.
So we're coming along to 2005, which is a pivotal year for you, maybe for the company, because this is the time that President George W. Bush, in his second administration, would tab you to be the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See.
He did, February 2005.
What was the first hint that that was coming about?
Well, I'd known the president. I got to know him when he was the managing partner of the baseball team when we built the stadium for him, and spent a lot of time with him, and really great person. And by the way, I would say he's the same level-headed, decent person right now and when he was in office as he was walking around that ballpark at Arlington site in 1991 or 2. He's a very well-grounded person. as is his brother Jeb. So when he ran for governor, we were involved in his campaign, helping him out, and certainly when he ran for president. In the first term, I was asked to do a few things that I do for him, attend some things that donors get to do. He sent me on a couple of presidential commissions, one to Panama with Colin Powell when Omar Torrijos was inaugurated. So I had a feeling they would ask me. They talked about some other things that just weren't quite ready. Our kids were still at Cassia Hall, and it just wasn't the time to leave the country. But the next time around, after the 2004 election, our daughter was fixing to head to Notre Dame. The boys were already at Notre Dame. It was a good time. So I was really surprised when the president asked me to do this because it's a very important post to him, certainly a prestigious one. All the European ones are. And I figured since I spoke Spanish, I'd probably get sent to the Dominican Republic or somewhere, But it was a great experience to be able to serve him, his administration, and the country.
Was there a point where he asked you directly?
Yeah, in his office.
Okay.
Yeah.
You went to the West Wing of the White House.
I got a call right after the inauguration. I mean, like the next week. We'd hardly even flown back. That they would like me to, within the next 10 days, if I could, come back to Washington and talk to him about some things. So I went in. It's all in my book. Dina Powell, who is the director of White House personnel, mentioned this position, and then I went and talked to the president for a while. That was it. Immediately, down to the State Department to get your papers.
So you said yes on the spot.
Course.
Because you discussed this with Kathleen and the kids.
We had a pretty good idea it'd be something. And she was okay with it.
At the time, I believe Pope John Paul was 84 and in poor health.
Right. We went over after he had died and when Pope Benedict was Pope.
Your preparation then for this position, kind of talk about that.
Yeah, the State Department does a very good job of preparing ambassadors to go to post. There were some things in the news last year about a couple of President Obama's choices that were embarrassed for not knowing enough about their country and the hearings and things. Believe me, that's not the State Department's fault. That's theirs. If you do what the State Department says, you will have enough consultations, read enough materials, you will be drawn into enough policy discussion to be able to be an effective representative of the country. You just have to put the time into it.
You had ambassadors, seminars?
Mm-hmm. First, we had a lot of consultations in the State Department. We were meeting people that were in positions or had been in positions that dealt with issues pertinent to the Holy See mission. Lots. I mean, like 30 or 40 consultations around the department, maybe more than that. And some other non-State Department entities, think tanks, things like that, that had information to adduce that would help me be well-rounded. Even had a 2-day seminar about Oriental and Orthodox religions, just so I could get the nomenclature down. Kathleen and I both did. You can't imagine how many different sects there are of Christianity. There's about 5 pages worth. Then the final thing is the ambassador seminar, which is a 2-week seminar that all ambassadors go to, whether you're a career department person or a political person. No matter how many times you've been an ambassador before, you're going to go to that seminar. The first week of it, they talk about the rules, how not to run afoul of the State Department's rules as far as financial reimbursement, what the government will pay for versus what you pay for, things like that. And the second week is more policy-centric, meeting with the press and learning those kind of things. They coach you.
Let's just explain here the difference between Holy See and Vatican.
The Holy See comes from the Roman word for seat, and it means the locus of authority, the centralization around the Pope and the Curia, the organization of the Church, the centralization of their influence and their ability to extend influence around the world. Vatican itself is a 108-acre piece of land which was given to the Holy See by the Lateran Treaty in 1929, which culminated settlement between the Holy See and Italy over the taking of the papal lands in 1870 when Garibaldi unified Italy. So the sovereignty stems from the influence of the Holy See in the world. In fact, people that want to undermine or demean the Holy See's role in the world will say that the sovereignty comes from the Vatican City State, therefore it's like Liechtenstein, who really cares about them. But in truth and in fact, the sovereignty stemming from a global organization with global reach is something that's valuable and useful both to the United States and other countries.
You have to be a Catholic to be an ambassador.
No. It helps. But 30 Holy See missions are from Arab states, and only 123 out of 180 are Catholic countries. But it's nice because all the ceremonial activities are Catholic related and get to know a lot of priests and things like that.
You were sworn in. Are you thinking to yourself, I'm this kid from Muskogee, and here I am?
Especially when I went in to meet the Pope.
Right. I want to get to that. But you were sworn in and then taken to the Oval Office, and President Bush was there. So this is pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, I'd been in the Oval Office before, but that was a nice surprise. The way swearing-ins go, you can have anybody you want swear you in. A lot of people get the Secretary of State. The risk of booking the Secretary of State is something that could happen, and he or she could have to fly off to Burundi or somewhere, and then you're stuck with some low-level functionary. So I didn't try to get Condoleezza Rice. So I thought I'd just go to the White House and get Andy Card, because I knew he'd be there. Chief of Staff's always there. He never leaves. So that's what I did. I got all done, and I went and have a little visit with my friend Karl Rove. He said, hey, guess what? We got a few minutes on the schedule free. Someone wants to say hi to you. So I went and spent a half-hour visit with President Bush. It was great.
Do you recall any of that conversation?
We talked about Rome and the visitors. We don't ever really go to Italy. We always go to Latin American countries. He said, you won't believe the visitors you're going to get. I didn't recall at the time, but one of his daughters had actually done a junior year abroad or something there, so he was quite familiar with Italy. And he was right. We got more visitors than you can imagine. We were bombarded by visitors. It was great, by the way, but a lot of that. We talked about the work and some of his priorities.
Okay, so then you received your official instructions then from him.
Well, the way that works, you receive official instructions in writing from the Secretary of State and in a letter from him. It's all very formal. This was more informal, like his priorities and different things. That's only the president would do. The way it works is you get a letter from the president that says, you are the president's personal representative in X country. You report directly to the president, and you're supposed to do these different kind of things to effectuate American policy there, broad understanding of American values, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get a separate letter from the Secretary of State, which basically said, yes, you're the president's personal representative, and that's all well and good, but you also work for me in the State Department. And in truth and in fact, that's what you do. I mean, you don't bother the White House all the time. You go through the desk officers for your area, work up through in our case, it was the European Bureau, EUR, and there was a desk officer that looked after Italy and the Holy See.
What were some of the issues that the president wanted you to address?
Well, he was very interested in the role the Vatican could play in the embryonic stem cell issue, which we definitely made sure the Vatican was deeply supportive of the president's work there. He was very interested, of course, in the global war on terror. And this was before Benedict had carved himself out as a virulent criticizer of radical Islamicists. That was something that I had a little bit of a role in helping try to get going, to get them to step up. And who would have known that Benedict would step up as strongly as he did in some of his speeches, which were very, very clear and helpful. He was very interested in PEPFAR, since Caritas is the huge caregiver in Africa and 27% of AIDS patients are dealt with in a Catholic healthcare institution. There's obvious synergy to leverage Caritas's ability to distribute retroviral drugs and things like that in Africa, which was what PEPFAR was there to do. So that's something that I worked on quite a bit. And then something that we didn't talk about that we did work on and that I did talk to him about later was the trafficking in persons, which our mission's very big in supporting these nuns around the world that try to get the girls and rehabilitate them and try to expose traffickers and things like that. The president became a real advocate of that program and helped us out a lot. When I left, the program was about 3 times as big as when I got there. Kathleen actually did a great breakfast when we were over there for Sister Eugenia, who's one of the world leaders in anti-trafficking. In fact, we had the OU CIS students go meet her when they were over there a couple of years ago. Kathleen had a breakfast for her and Mrs. Bush so they could meet up.
So you're on your way to Rome, and on an emotional side, how exciting this has got to be for your family.
It was exciting. We made it a family event, and the kids came back and forth all the time. But on the way over, what was interesting is what they tell you is you're going to get off the plane, and you're going to have to go in and make a speech right then and there. So I had to throw a tie on and whatnot.
Who's there to
It was to about 150 journalists, people interested in meeting the new ambassador, people interested in U.S. Holy See relations. They call it the ceremoniale. There's kind of a receiving room in the airport for these kind of dignitary things. I think a lot of airports probably have them. You would never know unless you were involved in that kind of thing. So they take you in there. I've been flying all night on American Airlines, so they let you get cleaned up a little bit. And then made my talk, and there it goes.
Told them why you were there and what you were representing.
Yeah, I'd written, the State Department had helped me. We'd written something up about what we wanted to accomplish and what the president wanted to accomplish with the Holy See. Started out just like gangbusters, Started with that, then went to the house, dropped the bags down, went to give another talk and a lunch. Just didn't stop for a while.
But then your first visit with Pope Benedict. Tell us about that experience.
Well, that was a really great experience. The Vatican picks you up. You have to wear they call it a frack over there, but what it is a white tie deal, tails, but instead of a white vest like we would wear in a debutante deal here, you wear a black one. So I had to get one of them. The Vatican picked us up in cars. Kathleen and I had a car, and kids had a different car, and some of the State Department folks that were coming had a different car, a big motorcade. It's just like the president. They shut down the street, and you go right up down Conciliazione, the main street there, right into the gate on the left side. I forget the name of the exact gate. It's in my notes. I think it's in the book, too. You go right in, and tourists are all behind those velvet ropes. Go in, see the Pope,
You didn't know that would happen to you. You're driving down there like the President of the United States. Then.
Yeah, it was really different. Yeah, I was very surprised by that.
Yeah.
I've been with presidents before when they're doing it, but I'd never
didn't think you
been
would.
doing it.
Right.
And, of course, people are taking all these pictures when we're walking through St. Peter's, and the kids were joking. They said, they think that's some dignitary, Daddy. They don't know it's just you.
Talk to us about that first visit. You walk into what room and how does that work?
The way it works in the Vatican is it's a labyrinth. And you go through one room, you go through another big room where there's a big white marble chair. That's where the popes used to actually sit when they received dignitaries. I joked with the president when we were walking through there. I said, up until about 30 years ago, the pope would have been sitting on that when he's talking with you. But anyway, not anymore. And you go around the corner through a couple more rooms. You get to the end, and you're just outside the papal library, which is the one they always use. It's got the big books on the end, the bookcases. That's the papal library. Just outside of it, there's an El Greco painting, and a lot of that kind of stuff there. So we get down to that. They open the door, and we go in. We do photos with the Pope. Actually, we do the photos in an anteroom called the Ambassador's Receiving Room. We do all the pictures. My mother and aunt from Florida were there. Aunt Eileen was going to come, Aunt Eileen Ugly, but her doctor wouldn't let her travel. She was in failing health at the time. In fact, that's a different story about that. I think I put it in the book about asking my aunts to come. But anyway, they took all the pictures. Then Kathleen and the kids, Mom, all left. They shut this huge door. It's just me and a Pope sitting around a table just like this in his library. And I thought, this is really something. I was nervous. I couldn't even really talk at first. And so he started talking. So then I finally got my deal going because I had some things I was supposed to say.
So he put you at ease.
He did.
He could read immediately that you were.
In fact, I said, I imagine this happens all the time, doesn't it? He said, yeah, it does happen a lot. He's kind of a sense of humor,
What is it about that moment? You're never at a loss for words, but you were then. What brings that on?
You're sitting there in the Apostolic Palace. Is built, started in the 12th century and finished in the 14th or 15th. You've gone through all these cotton-picking rooms, which I think there's a strategy. It's kind of like the warm-up bouts. You get in there, and they shut the door, and you're in the Pope's library. Every pope's been sitting there for 600 years, and you're sitting there with the Pope. I hardly even knew any bishops before we got this job. The two that buried Dad, Bishop Ganter and Beltran here, and I knew Bishop Slattery here, and those are about the only bishops I'd ever met.
To make small talk with a pope, it's hard to say, hi, how are you, like we say here, huh?
Exactly, so I couldn't talk at all. So he started speaking, and then I started speaking. I said a couple of things are really important to the President of the First Amendment, and he said, the First Amendment has been a great experiment. It's worked out very well for the United States. We talked a little about how it might be good for Europe to have had that at different times, separation of church and state. And I knew from having a brief that he was really clued in on the First Amendment, had actually made some talks about it at Notre Dame, in fact. So he knew the United States. We talked about the Iraq situation and how we were hoping that we could put the disagreements of the Holy See behind us, and he was all for that. He said, I'm basically starting a new regime here. I'm not going to carry over any old disagreements about Iraq. We want to work together to hopefully make the best of a tough situation for the people there and the Christians. And just talked about a whole laundry list of things that were important to the White House and the State Department.
Because the church opposed the U.S. involvement in Iraq.
Very much so.
You came prepared to defend that, no doubt, and he just kind of waved that off, and that was not going to be an argument.
Right. He said, I think enough's been said about Iraq. And he was right. Enough had been said, enough negative. Part of my job was to keep criticism of Iraq as muted as possible over there. And there were a few stone throwers in the Curia that were always shooting off about Iraq this, Iraq that. And by and large, they stayed pretty quiet for almost the whole time we were there. There's one time the Pope spoke up after a particularly heinous level of violence around Easter. He spoke up at his Easter morning Urbi et Orbi message about Iraq, but that was really the only time the Pope ever got into it. So I felt pretty good about doing my job anyway.
And your book, The Global Vatican, I suggest everybody should read, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
The Pope wanted to bring stability to the region and Islam fundamentalism, and he said there were two Mohammeds.
We were talking about the Quran and the problem of using the Quran for justifying violence and some of the harsh language in the Quran. He said, well, the problem is which Mohammed shows up. The Mohammed in the early surahs is very evangelistic, religious-oriented, nurturing, prayerful, merciful. I know that sounds strange to believe with Islam, and it is. But then the later surahs, as Muhammad became more aggressive, are more conquistatorial, more territorial, and more violent words. There's a lot of things in the Bible that read without the context of 2,000 years of interpretation can be fairly harsh sounding as well. So that seems to be one of the challenges for Islam, is to have them interpret their Quran in a way that's consistent with the modern world. That's kind of what the Pope was getting at. So the Quran's got something in there for everybody. We just got to get the right people using the right part.
Tell us about your office, location, staff, and that kind of thing.
The office is in a house that the government rents on the Circus Maximus, Aventine Hill. If this was my office, that would be the Circus Maximus right there, which really worked out great with journalists because I would sit with my back to the wall and it had a big couch and put the journalist over there. So anytime I get stumped for something, I'd say, boy, isn't it amazing to be here with the Circus Maximus? Which happens fairly regularly with journalists, quite frankly. So it was a nice little house. It's not a big mission, see, because we don't have consular activity, business promotion, et cetera. We had a couple political officers, protocol officer, some writers to turn out the daily grind of press releases and statements for different things. And then me and my DCM. That's the State Department person called the Deputy Chief of Mission. He's kind of the chief of staff of the ambassador, kind of keeps the wheels on, and is always a career official. Many of them end their careers by being ambassadors as well.
So you asked a lot of questions of him, I suppose. He gave you lots of counsel and guidance.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that they do that the ambassador don't want to fool with. So you can be off making speeches or attending public events, and they keep the wheels on, make first draft of different policy statements and things. But everything that goes out of an embassy goes out under the ambassador's name. So you really have to pay attention to what they write and edit it and make sure it's right. When the WikiLeaks happened, there was a cable about Poland that I'd written about the Holy See wanting to use the Poles to strengthen religion in Eastern Europe. Logical enough. When the WikiLeaks thing came out, some columnist, a Vatican columnist, made a comment that had to have been written by the State Department folks because no ambassador would know enough about Poland to write that. I called him up. I said, that is totally incorrect. I actually used a stronger language. I said, I wrote every word of that thing. But anyhow.
It's quite impressive. Your staff, though, you couldn't hire or fire. I mean, whatever.
No, and it was very interesting for me, having run a business all my life, to have a team there that I didn't hire, couldn't fire, and could really do very little to incentivize or manage because they're civil servants from the State Department.
How did that work? Did you feel you needed to or you should have been able to?
Well, I learned a lot there of trying to figure out how to motivate people without the traditional tools. For example, one thing they tell you about in an ambassador school is a lot of the do's and don'ts that you can't use government money for or government people for doing personal things. For example, making a personal restaurant reservation for Kathleen and the kids to go eat when the kids are over there. That's not official business. So technically the OMS, which is what the secretary is called over there, the Office Management Specialist, is not supposed to do that, nor is she supposed to mail a personal letter for you. So I said, okay, I would email Sharon here and say, Sharon, could you please make a reservation at Giovanni's over here around the corner from our house in Rome? She would make the reservation, or airplane tickets or whatever. So finally, Tammy, the OMS, came in and said, I can make these reservations for you and do all this stuff. And I said, technically you're not supposed to. She said, well, I can if I want. I said, okay. I just didn't want to get afoul of any rules. And they put those rules in there so that if the ambassador's a jerk, the people don't get abused. And it's smart. I can understand it now, and I agree with it, because not all ambassadors care whether Tammy feels good or not. But coming from a company of people, I wanted to make sure everybody wanted to do a good job and felt good and wanted their feedback and that kind of stuff. So,
and that staff must have noticed that difference, perhaps, read that in you, and that must have been their incentive to work.
Well, I was probably a little more casual than my predecessor. He's a former military guy.
Who was your predecessor?
Jim Nicholson. Great guy. Great Republican leader, great family person, great Catholic, great ambassador. But each person's style is different. Mm-hmm. I was more casual. Theoretically, everybody stands up when an ambassador comes in the room. Well, they did that one day. First staff meeting that afternoon when we got there, I said, you don't have to do that. That's ridiculous. A lot of times I purposely miss the staff meetings and say, Chris, you guys figure this out.
They addressed you as Mr. Ambassador.
Oh, yeah, they always do
time.
that. Always do that. But this standing up, that's kind of ridiculous. And having to wear a coat in the meeting.
Not necessarily amongst your staff, but in the Vatican. Were there those who resented you as an ambassador of the United States because you were from the United States? Did you get any of that?
Oh, occasionally. In fact, there's a deal in almost every mission where the longest tenured ambassador is called the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps for that country. So our Dean of the Diplomatic Corps was a old half-communist socialist from San Marino. Every year, in the first week of January, when we have our annual Ambassadors Diplomatic Corps meeting with the Pope and his blessing and all that, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps gets up and makes statements that are supposed to reflect what the Diplomatic Corps feels and thinks. So I went over to see this guy. The first week I was there, I said, look, you're not going to mention Iraq, and you're not going to mention global warming. He said, well, yeah, I think I need to mention this. I said, if you do, right there in St. Peter's, I'm going to call a press conference, and I'm going to attack you with everything I've got. You're not going to mention global warming, and you're not going to mention Iraq. I said, I come from a business, okay? This is pussyfooting around stuff here. I'm going to represent President George W. Bush. He did not like me at all. But he didn't mention Iraq, nor did he mention global warming that time.
Was that probably the only time you had to be so direct and stand up?
There were a few other things, but that was one that I thought was important to get off on the right foot. I didn't think it up because last time the guy had mentioned a bunch of anti-U.S. stuff. So the State Department said, could you please do what you can to try to muffle him? So did what I could to muffle him.
Most mornings, then, you went to the Vatican?
Yeah, the diplomatic work is conducted with the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, which is organized much like ours. Different monsignors have responsibilities for different country issues. They have a Secretary of State. He has people under him. And so most of those meetings would be either with the Secretary of State or his top people under him. And usually they bring in some of the various monsignors who have specific country knowledge, just like if you go to the State Department and you meet with Secretary Rice or you meet with Nick Burns, they might call in the people from the EUR Bureau because they're the ones that really are digging deep into what's going on in those countries. That work takes place in the mornings over there. So I'd say 3 or 4 times a week I'd have a meeting over there.
A little bit about the power of the Pope. Every chain of command leads to him?
Yes. In fact, that's part of the problem, and that's what Pope Francis is trying to address. They still have a vestige of monarchism, if you will, where each dicastery and pontifical council reports directly up to the Pope. You've seen Cardinal Worrell and Cardinal Dolan make comments about this, that we need more of an executive management, modern management structure where there's teamwork and cross-pollination of ideas and things like that, instead of these silos. The silos are good for like intelligence because you don't want anybody else to know what you're doing, and they don't want you to know what they're doing in case somebody goes bad or something. Contain the damage. But in business or in an organization like this, you need to have differences of opinions, team building, and different skills brought to bear to make the best decisions in a very complex world. And that's what Pope Francis is trying to accomplish now. But when I was over there were people that there's one person they reported to, and that's the only person they were going to report to.
What position is the highest ranking next to the Pope?
The Secretary of State. The Secretary of State there is kind of like a combination Prime Minister and American Secretary of State. He really has that wide a span of authority. Under him, you have the Prime Minister side organization, which they call the First Section, which deals with things coming from the Holy See to the world. And then you have what they call the Second Section, which is the State Department side, if you will, which deals with interrelations with the ambassadors and heads of state and all that.
The difference in a Pope's personality can affect the position. Pope John was so outgoing, was such an extrovert. Pope Benedict, he was an academic. I guess they both were, but he was intensely intellectual.
Philosopher.
And so his demeanor was a little withdrawn, I suppose. These differences can affect the office he holds?
Oh, yeah, for sure. In fact, that's a really good question. One thing that happened a bunch of times to me was I'd get a call from some big Catholic in the United States. And he'd say, I want to go have Mass with the Pope. I said, well, the Pope doesn't do Mass with people. He said, well, Pope John Paul used to. I used to come over there and watch him put on his vestments, and he'd have about 10 or 15 businessmen. We'd have Mass with the Pope. I said, well, this Pope doesn't do that. This is a new Pope. In fact, when the Pope went to see the President in April of 2008, the White House said, okay, we want to have a state dinner for the Pope. And I said, he ain't going to come. I guarantee you, he's not going to come. He will meet with the President, and he will do the other things that day, and he will go to the nunciature and have a beer and play the piano and have dinner and go to bed. That's what he will do. They said, well, we want you to get him there. I can't get him there. You guys pay me to know what the Pope's going to do. I'm telling you exactly what the Pope's going to do. And that's exactly what he did. So at the state dinner, President, right over here, he stands up and says, okay, welcome to the state dinner for the Pope without the Pope. And they even had German food.
You said play the piano. Did the Pope play the piano?
Pope Benedict plays piano.
What kind of music? What did he play?
Well, that I don't know.
You never heard him play?
No, but he's known for doing that.
Benedict we're talking about. John Paul had deep respect for President Reagan, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the stories are a legend about the parallel but naturally aligned efforts that Reagan, Thatcher, and Pope John Paul had to help bring down communism, each doing their own thing.
I believe George H.W. Bush was not as engaged with the Vatican.
Well, he was, but I wouldn't say he was maybe as public as obviously the Pope John Paul II communism business was. But there were a lot of things they worked on together. Ambassador Tomalati, who was his ambassador to the Holy See, died just last year. And I put some things in the book about some of the things he did, like when we invaded Panama, took Noriega down, and he went to the nunciature and things like that.
Bill Clinton had some disagreements?
Bill Clinton had some serious disagreements in a limited, circumscribed relationship, particularly because of the Cairo Population Conference in '94, where Hillary Clinton led the day to try to get euthanasia and abortion in a plank or platform. The Holy See made that a real priority, if you will, to stop it. And they worked very hard to bring forces to bear against the Clintons. And they succeeded, including getting a bunch of Muslim women led by Benazir Bhutto to stand up and oppose the National African League, or whatever they call it, effort to do that.
And then George W. Bush, I believe he set a record for U.S. presidents in visiting the Pope.
He had 6 visits, I think it was. I don't think any other popes ever had more than 1 or 2. He was very interested in what the Holy See had to say about different things, particularly about Iran, particularly about the global war on terror, the stem cell things I mentioned, and PEPFAR and whatnot, but very, very engaged.
He talked about his own faith, a spiritual connection that he has, although he's not a Catholic.
No, he's Episcopalian.
Still, he is very taken with the Pope from a spiritual standpoint, but then he also realizes in the world the position the Pope can play.
That's exactly right. He's a very religious person, so he values the role of religion in society and in people's lives. That's one thing. The other thing, as such, then, it's natural that he can see that the Pope can be a leading instrument for good for a value-based government, a value-based diplomacy.
Now, our president, President Barack Obama, has not been as engaged, I believe, with the Vatican as, well, certainly George W. Bush. However, it's interesting they have connected now on Cuba.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. You know, first 6 years, President Obama had very, very little interest in the Holy See. And, of course, the Holy See had very little interest in him because of some of the positions he'd taken, mostly on the life issues and things like that. Now, with the arrival of Pope Francis, beginning with the discourse about social justice and capitalism versus safety net and the poor and all that, there's been a little more symmetry with the views of this administration. I think the Pope's been misunderstood a few times, and the press sometimes has a habit of taking what they want out of something and extracting that tidbit without getting the whole thing. We all do that in our own way. But that was what I think brought the president to have the visit last March with him. In fact, I had the chance to do some briefing work on that with the Secretary of State's office in November preceding that visit. They were interested in some of the things that Pope Francis was saying. And I think that visit went pretty well. The president tried to manipulate the Pope, and they even released a statement before the meeting had been held to the press saying what the meeting had said, which is a little ironic. It's kind of hard to know what the meeting's going to do to you at the meeting, but Obama had it figured out, I guess. And the Pope, I think, showed that he wasn't going to be manipulated by the president. So they each kind of did their global leader thing. And, of course, this recent activity with Cuba, regardless of what you feel about Cuba, and there are some really strongly felt opinions about Cuba, it does show the important role the Holy See can play in the world, especially in diplomacy, because of its unique kind of soft power, influence power, and its convening power, to be able to bring people together. And because it doesn't need to take credit for it, it can work clandestinely. That was very important for that thing to get that far, that nobody get the cat out of the bag too quick.
Well, I believe Pope Francis had worked on that a long time before that meeting with the president, probably before the president even knew he was working on the Cuba situation.
Yeah, every pope has sought an end to the embargo from a humanitarian point of view and restoration of diplomatic relations, because the Holy See always takes the position it's better to dialogue than not. I kind of agree with him on that. I've been to Cuba. Look around, there's no Americans there, just a few tourists. I happen to think that if Americans are there, being good Americans, that more and more people are going to realize the exceptionalism is real in this country. So I think it's healthy that we have people out there, business out there, provided we can get it on a way where it doesn't just embolden Castro, where it actually emboldens the people. And there's some technical things about that we can talk about if you want to, but it's very important that we make the right kind of deal, and I'm not totally comfortable that this president will do that.
Pope Francis could have met a president who didn't agree with him, who could have said, no, I believe the embargo ought to be in place. Right. But he did meet Barack Obama, who said, I agree with you.
In fact, it's kind of parallel to the symmetry between Reagan's anti-communism and Pope John Paul's. Now you had a president who said, I want to restore relations and eliminate the embargo, and a pope that wanted to. And it worked out very well diplomatically.
And the president, of course, as any president will be on anything, was criticized by many factions here in the United States for taking that stand. And I don't know if that'll become part of the presidential race or not, how Cuba is being.
Yeah, to me, I think it's fine to have diplomatic relations, and it's fine to open up for business and all that, provided we have the right safeguards. You know, it worked in Eastern Europe because the internet was new and nobody knew how to control it. So they had open internet, open access to what was going on in America. Ceausescu had said that Americans didn't have enough food to eat and roamed around wearing bear skins. Well, the people of Romania could see, nope, that's not the case at all. They got food we don't. So we need to have open internet. We've got to have protections for the rule of law. And particularly, there's one thing that happens in Cuba that's very bad. Companies there, like the Spanish and Italian hotel chains, don't pay their workers. They pay the government in euros or dollars, and the government pays the workers in these Cuban pesos. So A, the government haircuts them, and B, the government is the one that people have allegiance to, not their employer. So how do you build a feeling of team, culture, and being part of the hotel or part of the factory when the government's the one paying you? We've got to change that.
Religious freedom was a focus for President Bush. He had visited China, and his hope was that China would not fear Christians who gathered to worship openly. However, there was a delicate balance going on here. Talk about
Yeah, the China thing's very interesting. First of all, one thing I did when I first got there, the president went to China and he turned around to Hu Jintao and said, you need to be honest about religious freedom here. So I immediately called a press conference and said, see, this shows why our great president and the United States are the most vigorous defenders of religious freedom. And what a great thing that we have this mission here at the Holy See, which shows the synergy of the U.S. and the Holy See and our commitment to religious freedom. And of course, the Holy See, classic stiletto diplomacy. The next day in an Italian newspaper, unnamed sources rebuke the United States and are reminded that the Holy See doesn't need anybody to tell them about religious freedom. That's like first time I got slapped across the face. They're right, but it was good, and it was a good opportunity for me to say something that was good for our mission and good for the president, so I didn't really care if the Holy See didn't like it or not. And I put in the book about religious freedom in China and the Holy See's view that it's kind of like a bird cage. There's an analogy that the Archbishop Shelley said, well, sometimes they'll allow more religious freedom and the bird can fly around, and sometimes they restrict it, depending on the flavor of the day and what's been going on. But the Holy See takes a very long-term view. They would actually not say it, but I think there's an element of you can't go too far too fast. You got to play for the long ball and let the country build, middle class build. You just don't want a Tiananmen Square.
The Chinese government wants to control the Catholic Church within its borders, so you have that going on. The relationship today between China and the Church, talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The Holy See is willing to play for the long ball and not challenge China openly. Okay. But at the same time, they make the argument that China is better off with an entity that they can speak with a hierarchy, than these one-off evangelical preachers roaming around that nobody's got any kind of control over them. I don't think China necessarily buys all that, but some people do. And there is a basis of continual dialogue between the Holy See and members of the Chinese government.
Well, is it true that bishops openly committed to Rome could be jailed?
Oh, yeah. They dealt a couple of them just a couple of years ago. So, and every once in a while, they'll slap a few people around like that to make sure that the political climate is of the right dialogue that they want it to be.
You're back in Rome after the holidays, and the Pope says to you, so we're going to see Mrs. Bush.
Yeah, that was interesting. At that time, Mrs. Bush wanted to come over to see the Pope as part of a delegation to the Turin Olympics. The rumor was that she probably wouldn't come unless she could see the Pope. It was that important to her. And the Pope had not at that time seen any private visitors. He had only seen presidents and ambassadors in large groups. So I had to go see the Secretary of State, Cardinal Sodano, and I said, look, Mrs. Bush wants to come see the Pope. And he said, well, that's really difficult, because the Pope only sees presidents. And I said, well, she's the closest thing you're going to get to the president right now. So finally he called back and he said, tell you what, let's just make it a private visit. That way we can get around the... And of course it had all the trappings of a full state visit, it had the whole bit, walking through the same place I did, all the guards there, the exchange of gifts. It was a state visit, everything but name only.
Do you know what they talked about?
Yeah, I sat there with them. We talked about a lot of things. One interesting thing we talked about, since Barbara, the daughter, was there, had worked in an AIDS clinic in South Africa. I brought that up. We talked about that. And the Pope got talking about the situation here in Africa where Saudi Arabia had allowed the Wahhabis to operate madrasas in Sub-Saharan Africa. This was back 2005, okay? And what the Pope was concerned about, he said, look, this is going to radicalize Muslims that have heretofore not been radical. They've been fairly secular Muslims, like Indonesians or Malaysians. We're talking Niger, Mali, Cameroon, Nigeria, for the most part. And that's in truth, in fact, happened. These Wahhabis, Saudi Arabia said, just don't cause trouble at home in the kingdom, and we'll help you financially go run madrasas away. Well, okay, that's a Faustian bargain, which has resulted in Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda of the Maghreb and all that kind of stuff now. Mm-hmm. You talked about that with Mrs. Bush back then.
What do you think came out of that meeting, after effects from it?
I think that Mrs. Bush really enjoyed the meeting, was very honored to have the time with the Pope and her daughter. It laid the groundwork for the president to come. She definitely made sure that they knew that the president wanted to come as soon as he could. And I think the Pope got a lot out of meeting Mrs. Bush. I mean, here she's a wonderful person, very religious person as well. The daughter, Barbara, the same. So I think that was good for the Pope to see.
And she had such an easy, sweet personality.
Super nice.
Right.
Super nice.
Leadership positions in the church are filled with very well-educated men. They speak fluently in many languages, knowledgeable to speak about the issues of many countries.
Oh, yeah.
You are well-educated yourself, but did you ever feel intimidated around any of these guys?
Sure. I got enough trouble becoming moderately to severely fluent in Spanish. And here you're talking to some guy who speaks 6 languages. The Pope one day, one of his blessings, even spoke Guarani to a bunch of Paraguayans. Pretty amazing people. And their depth of knowledge is very deep. Whether it's Kosovo or Eritrea or something in Asia, their country knowledge is very good. And they're very, very intent diplomatically to know what's going on and to be able to express the fairly cogent diplomatic position on the part of their values.
I don't know if you thought of it this way, but that's what they've done all their life, is to study.
Yeah.
That's what they've done. That's their area of expertise. And so you'd have to look at them as, okay, they're an expert in that.
There was one lunch we were doing. I had a bunch of Monsignors there and George Weigel. They were talking about deep stuff, as only George Weigel can do. And I didn't understand about half what they were saying. There's got to be talking about the Peace of Westphalia. Well, I got up from the table, walked into my study, Googled Peace of Westphalia, made a few quick notes, came back and sat down. And when they got to this point, I said, oh, yeah, what about this part of the Peace of Westphalia over here?
And they were impressed.
Exactly. Briefly, not for very long.
Cardinal Tehran was an expert in Islam religion. He was one of the harshest critics, I believe, of the U.S. role in Iraq, but he didn't hold any ill will toward the United States. He said the central problem with Islam was the failure to acknowledge the right of non-Muslims to exist.
He's right. And as long as you're going to interpret the Quran literally, you're going to have a problem. Because the Quran literally says everybody else is apostate but us. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's the immutable object meeting the irresistible force. Cardinal Tehran is so clear, very general, like Pope Benedict. He's not a brazen speaker like Cardinal Martino and a few of the other people that spoke out against the United States. He's very soft-spoken, but every word counts. He made a speech a while back, I use it in my speeches, about what's the Holy See's diplomacy. And he says, well, our role is to contest systems or ideas that corrode the dignity of the person or threaten world peace. Simple. Says it all. You could write an entire book about what those words mean diplomatically for them.
Many of these things could go on with further discussion, but we move on. And again, I refer to your book, The Global Vatican. I want to talk about that here in a moment. But interesting about Iraq, here we are in 2015, really the beginning stages of the campaigns for the next president of the United States. And Iraq, at this moment, in May, is an issue. Here we have Jeb Bush, who's being asked, would you have invaded Iraq had you known what you now know? He had a little trouble answering that. And it could be an issue that goes further into the campaign.
It could be. It could be. And I think Governor Bush answered the question. There's a little controversy over that. I think it's not going to go away. It's too easy for opponents to try to tie him to George W.
Right. I only bring it up now because as we talked about it, you were talking about it then when you were there in the Vatican, and here we are in 2015 still grappling with that issue. What was the defining act of Pope Benedict's papacy, do you believe?
I would say his Regensburg speech, where he brutally attacked Muslim extremism and violence, pulled no punches. In fact, the White House called and said, go find out if he meant what he said and tell him, for God's sakes, don't back up on it, that we're all for him.
It's not enough to renounce violence, but to denounce it.
Yeah. And to call on Muslims, and Pope Francis has picked up the same mantle, is call on Muslims to figure out their religion. If you've got 1 billion-something Muslims and a couple 100,000 of them are dirty and the rest of them are not, the ones that are not are being besmirched by the ones that are.
In 2007, President Bush said he would come to visit with you and Kathleen, and others met him at the airport. Tell us about that.
That was great. I'd never seen a presidential visit in an official capacity like that, so we're out there, and the Vatican, as a show of respect for the president, sent 2 greeters. They sent Peter Wells, who's from Guthrie, in fact, and they sent a cardinal that had been the nuncio ambassador in India. So the Italian protocol officer came up and said, 1 priest has to go. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Ron Spogli's here, the ambassador to Italy, as is the ambassador of Italy to the United States. So you have but you have 2 Holy See representatives. So there's one more Holy See representative than there is Republic of Italy representative. So I went up to Denise Birch, head of advance for the president, and I explained it. I said, "You think you could talk to this guy?" She went up to him and she said, "Listen, the only reason we're coming here is to see the Pope. If the Vatican had an airport, we would not be landing in Italy." That's what she told this guy. This guy scurried off with his tail between his legs, like a wounded dog. It's pretty good. But then the president had a great visit. He's always so enthusiastic, bounced off the plane, rode into town. It was late, so then got some sleep. The next day, Kathleen had the breakfast with Mrs. Bush and Sister Eugenia that I mentioned, and I had meetings with the president. Then we went to see the Pope. Part of the meeting was just the president. Part of the meeting was with me and John Negroponte in there. Then we met with the Secretary of State as well, the president. And then we went to lunch. And when we were leaving the Holy See to go have lunch and to go to a diplomatic reception for the staff and stuff, the State Department people of all the missions, the limo died right in the middle of Rome. It's too hot. It was really interesting. The crowds are coming in, making the usual types of gestures that crazy Italians do when they're excited.
And you were in the same car.
Me, Negroponte, the president, and I think Josh Bolton. I'm not sure.
And so you see the crowd coming up closer and closer.
Yeah, and so the president opened the door, which drove the Secret Service crazy, and waved to him and calmed him down, which was really great. They kind of calmed down, and it took the guy about 5 minutes to get the car going. And I asked the president, "Has this ever happened to you before?" He said, "Only happened one time in Dallas," which I thought was kind of...
Yeah.
But anyway, they got it going. Then we got to the building where this meeting was going to be. I'd set up with this group called St. Egidio, which is a non-governmental organization that does peacekeeping missions and humanitarian help. Really good folks. And the advance team that had been over there for so long, figuring all the details out, had not figured out that the limo would not fit through the gate of this mansion we were going to. So the guy tried, how you try to sandwich your way in? So finally, the president says, "Stop it." Opens the door, says, "Let's get out of here." So we just walked. It's decent. The Secret Service scurrying along, and the president walks fast. I mean, he is a really good athlete. Keeping up with him, you got to walk fast.
Just kind of describe his personality and what he's like when you're up close as you've been with him.
He is a really great person. I mean, he's a strongly religious person, strongly principled person, kind, warm. He's got a great sense of humor.
Do you think he came off differently on the national television stage than he did as you got to sit and visit with him?
No.
It was the same.
Yeah, he used to crack jokes and stuff and was very approachable on the national stage. You could see his strong commitment to his principles. I think that came out, in his religion and everything.
Interesting. You cite in your book when he saw Archbishop Harvey from Wisconsin, he says, "How about them Brewers?"
Yeah. In fact, just before we were getting out of the limo, I said, "Okay, Mr. President, this is Archbishop Harvey from Wisconsin." And that's my job, is to make sure he tuned up to do something good,
So as the president...
He's a huge baseball fan, President Bush.
As the president left 2007, you began to feel that maybe it was time for you and Kathleen to return to the United States.
We'd hit it hard. We really hit it hard. I mean, from day one, we had more receptions in the first 6 months at that mission than any other had the entire time they'd been there. We just wore the place out.
We've talked a lot about what you did, but Kathleen was your partner.
Totally.
And you talked about all these functions you have. So she was very involved in all of that, I would say.
She did a fantastic job of organizing the social aspects of representing the United States. She was always there, no matter how tired, to go to one more thing if we had to go to it. She never said no to anything. I mean, you got to manage the butler and the cook and the protocol people and the seating and the menu cards. And there's all this elaborate... Even inviting someone to dinner over there is an elaborate process. It takes a village. She really did a fantastic job. And we had tons of coffees, cocktail receptions, dinners, lunches, breakfasts, you name it. We had it all. We wore the house out. We did tons of events. So, after the president left, and that happens a lot in these kind of deals, you get towards the end of a second term, a lot of your friends in the White House are all leaving, going to private industry. It was kind of time. We'd been there a while. I've been basically doing nothing but ambassador things since the first week of February of 2005.
Mm-hmm. So you did a total of 3 years?
It's 3 years when you include the time in the State Department before we got over there.
As you've reflected many times on this experience, what are your takeaways from it?
I learned a lot. So did Kathleen, and so did the kids. We all learned a lot, both about our church and about the role of the United States in the world, and certainly learned a lot about Italy. I mean, there's nowhere in Rome we haven't been, a few times. And also, it was very interesting, like I said, working with the embassy staff and having to confront a different management challenge, which Kathleen, she had to change out a butler. She had to change out a chef here in a foreign country. She had her share of personnel issues to deal with as well.
Did it deepen your own faith, you think?
Yeah, it did, in a funny kind of way, because Archbishop Chaput, before I went over there, made a comment to me. He said, don't lose your faith over it when you see all the kind of sausage-making secularism that goes on, because they're men, and they're powerful men. And so it made me just ignore all the process. Like there was one time I was sitting at a St. Peter's Mass, I forget which holiday, and I'm seeing all these cardinals over there kind of jockeying for position and who gets to sit in the front row and all that. And I'm sitting there thinking, that guy said something bad about the president, and this guy here hates the United States, and this guy did this guy dirty, because you know everything. You really have access to incredible information. But then I said, well, I'm sitting here 30 feet from the bones of St. Peter, and I've got to meet the Pope, so forget all this, guys.
But that's good for anybody who listens to this to say, don't lose your faith over, because every church and every denomination has the yin and the yang that goes on and the making of the sausage. So it's good for everybody to remember that, whether you're in the Vatican or whether you're in a Baptist church in Tulsa.
Yeah, Stephen Covey made a fortune as a management consultant with one phrase: keep the main thing the main thing.
Right. Pope Francis is coming here this fall. Are you invited to any of that?
I don't know. What I've heard from the State Department is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is control attendance at the big Mass at Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. The hope of the State Department is that all the past ambassadors are invited.
Terrorism, the group known as ISIS. Is there a place for the Catholic Church in this war? ISIS can't be reasoned with. Can a church even get themselves involved in terrorism?
Yeah, I would make the argument that the Holy See's form of diplomacy is particularly useful in dealing with these kinds of issues, because we've come to learn the hard way that hard power has limited value in that kind of country where it's a desert, where the people are uneducated, where they don't have an economy. What economy they do is based on narcotics other than oil. These are very difficult parts of the world. So the Holy See's soft power voice of reason, of persuasion, is a useful diplomatic tool. The other fact of the matter is that they have a particular, call it standing, if you will, as a religion to speak about religion. And people are starting to write about that more and more now, that the religions of the world need to be speaking up about one of their brethren, the Islamic one, that's kind of becoming hijacked by a sect, a bad sect. And that religions can talk to each other, whereas secular people may be able to be impeached and say, well, you're just a country. You just want a hegemonic advantage, where the Holy See doesn't. The Holy See's pure. That way, sometimes when they say things, they can't be criticized and undermined as readily in what they're trying to say. So I think those are important opportunities for the Holy See's diplomacy to add value. And so you're starting to see more and more right now, Muslims taking responsibility for Islam. One guy, an Egyptian guy, in December wrote in the Wall Street Journal that this is not my Islam. Admiral Freeman here a while back spoke up about the need for Muslims to confront their religion, and the Pope's been saying that. Those are all healthy starts. We're a long way from the end.
They need to do more of that, because it also helps educate America at large, because they're trying to sift through this themselves.
And a lot of people are appeasement-oriented. I don't believe it'll work. It hasn't worked in England. So when people speak up about this, maybe it'll keep people from becoming appeasement-oriented and maybe crystallize some people's thoughts. These are very difficult concepts, but you look at the guy that was burning the Korans in Florida 2 years ago. I went nuts when General Petraeus spoke up against that. I said, what is that guy fighting for? And then this recent Charlie Hebdo business. The first one of those happened in 2005 when I was in Rome.
Tell us what that is.
That was when there was the cartoon that had the rockets coming out of Mohammed's head. They published it in a Danish publication. So the radical terrorists started murdering people and bashing in storefronts and things like that. We called a press conference and talked about that the United States is the strongest committed nation in the world to religious freedom and freedom of the press. These kind of things have to be taken seriously, and you can't appease your way out of it.
We hear people say they want to stomp out terrorism. Do you think we can ever stomp out terrorism?
I don't think we know how this radical Islamic business is going to end, but we know someday it will. Everything comes to an end. Sooner or later, it will be solved. And there may be some different terrorism of a different kind at a different time in the kind of world we have now that's so interconnected and open. But I think there's some things we need to do to hasten the demise of radicalized Islamic segments, and that we can do a better job in some areas than we are, none of which involves using American ground troops other than special forces.
So young people headed to college, coming out of college, what kind of advice do you give to these people?
I would say, to paraphrase Ben Franklin, that people that will choose security over freedom deserve neither. and that these things like free press, things like freedom of religion were hard earned by a bunch of people who put their whole life into it. All these founding fathers were the wealthiest leaders of the country, and they all died broke. They put it all in the United States. And to go waste that by being scared to do hard things or confront bad people is really unfortunate. And we've seen a lot of countries go down that road. I mean, you look at Europe. They got to where they don't stand for anything. Interestingly enough, right now, you're seeing France and Spain perk up after that Charlie Hebdo business. They've passed some very, very invasive, restricting of freedom, new laws to monitor people that access radicalized websites and things like that. They don't have a Fourth Amendment over there. They're going to start to take some of the harsh measures that you would take if you consider this a war.
If you consider this a war.
If you consider radical Islamic terrorism a war, you can look at it through a different lens than, what did Obama call it, an overseas contingency operation or something ridiculous. If you look at it as a war, then you apply wartime levels of containment and interdiction. You don't attach Fourth Amendment rights to criminals, to terrorists, to enemy combatants, and you start to look at it with a little different lens.
We should also point out that people are dying for their faith. When an ISIS terrorist would ask somebody if they're a Christian, they kill them if they won't own up to it. I want those who are going to listen to this 25, 50 years from now that people actually died for their faith in this day and age.
Yeah, how about the video of the 21 Christians in Libya?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for sharing about Manhattan and your experience at the Vatican. Is there anything that I haven't said or you would like to proclaim?
Well, I'm just thankful to have been from Oklahoma and to have a company in Oklahoma. It's a great place to have a company. We've worked in a lot of foreign countries and certainly a lot of parts of the United States and have never had as good of workers, as decent of people as the people in Oklahoma. I think that's been a big part of our strength here and our success. And Texas is quite similar, but Texas is more complex and more diverse. And I just feel really fortunate that we've had a lot of good people here that have worked together to do something bigger than any one of us individually.
Was that a tough adjustment coming from the Vatican back to the office of Manhattan? Was that a big adjustment?
No, the only thing that was tough was over the course of 2009 and 10 and 11, I realized we had to make some changes and turbocharge this operation again, that the world was different. Some of our guys maybe needed a little bit of, like I said, that spiritual tune-up. Now I feel good with the new team we've got in place. I think we've saved the best of Manhattan and we brought in some new blood, and I think we're retuned, and I think we're going to be able to face the next generation competently.
And I would imagine the experience of the Vatican and managing people and your experience there certainly add to applying that as a CEO of Manhattan.
Yeah, the only downside is I saw what we had to do as soon as I got back. I talked to Kathleen, and she agreed, and I just didn't want to fool with it. I just had 3 years of ambassador life and just wasn't prepared to dig in, and I did a disservice to Natalie and all the other people in the company. We probably should have dealt with these problems in 2009 and 10. Now, on the other hand, if the team that we've got now works out, they're here a long time and they do the kind of things we hope they can do, we'll be glad that we waited and got them, because we might not have got them in 2010. We got them in 2014.
Yeah. Oklahoma's proud of Manhattan because you represent this state in many, many entities in the United States. So thank you for that, and thank you for visiting with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the chance to do this.